So we're ready to start working on the budget review. And by request of our committee, we'd like to go over those questions that you have and have answered. Okay, Chris, did you see the questions?
Yeah.
So for the benefit of the public, I think what I'd like to do is read the question, and then you can answer it and we can discuss it. Sound okay?
Okay.
Okay?
Sure.
The first one had to do capital investment in housing and in a potential new elementary school are high on the list of current discussions around town. What links the two is a hope that the new housing units will bring new children to town that will aid the decision on a new school building. As we look to the future, can we have an analysis of what the impact of the new housing will be on our elementary school enrollment?
So I think it's very important that we clarify at the beginning of this meeting that the majority of these questions are not specifically related to the FY26 budget as we've listed right here. We can talk about anything you want that's financial, including this, but they're not specifically related to the budget, right? So I just want to make sure that that's identified and not misrepresented on your agenda, right? That being said, Elizabeth has prepared a memo on this, but I'm going to give you the short piece of it because this doesn't, the reality of the situation is for the potential impact on the elementary school with the potential affordable housing is we're not actually anticipating any increase in enrollment related to the additional affordable units. The reality is there's only 24 of the units that are going to be 3 bedrooms, and those are typically the ones that house families. And so, and also the makeup demographics of the families that go into the affordable housing units mirror, for the most part, the demographics of your community at this time. And 80% of the homes on Cape Cod have no children in them. So that's what we have. Now, there's some more comprehensive studies, and Elizabeth, I'll send you what Elizabeth put together for me on it, but that's really the gist of it, which is we are not anticipating a significant increase in cost related to the school or some significant shift in enrollment. That said, there is existing capacity within the school as it stands because of the declining enrollment. And so it really isn't factoring in much now, but I mean, the truth of that, the backside of that is we'll know a lot better about a lot of things. And, you know, when the regional study comes back with the data, right? But in terms of the threat of affordable housing increasing enrollment, that's not something that we see happening.
And do we know when the regional study will become available?
So we're just getting started, right? We just got the grant funding available again this past January. And so, you know, it takes about a year. So, you know, a lot, it's not going to answer that question anyway, but we'll have a better picture on this particular one, perhaps if we can get the data from the new FAR development, the Cape Cod 5 building. So, you know, it might be interesting to see if people need to see, you know, real-time examples in our community, what it looks like. We might know a lot better in a few months, right? Mm-hmm. So.
Okay. Any questions?
So are we promised an analysis report from the Cape Cod 5 new building as to?
No.
No?
No.
So you're not being hopeful, you're just going with we're not going to have any children. It's just not going to happen.
Well,
because I'm an optimist, that's all I'm trying to tell you.
I mean, the reality is even if we were to get children for each one of those 3-bedroom units, we're talking about 24 children. And so the next question then becomes, what does that actually mean in terms of impact to us? Well, the reality is we have the capacity right now for those 24 children, right? So it's sort of, you know, it's early days in trying to determine what, if any of that impact has on the future of what we decide to do with an elementary school, right? It's very early. You know, I'm sure we'd all love to hope it went the opposite way and somehow we got 120 families in town and there were, you know, a lot more children coming in, but the odds are low, right? It's more likely than not that the people that are moving into these units that we build are already people from the existing communities, and we know what those demographics are.
Chris?
Yeah, I was just wondering, I mean, isn't it really the case that it's going to be a decade before we see what the results of any of this is? I mean, it's been a long time coming and a long time waiting, and it's going to be, now that it's started, it's great, but it's going to be a long time before we know what the effects are.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? So the next question, I'm going to share these questions. Nick, if you've got it in front of you, how about you get to read it? I don't want to read them all.
Yeah.
Number 2.
Number 2. So related to number 1 above, in June 2024, the Housing Committee Trust and the Housing Trust presented a proposal to add 200 units over those currently being completed, which are currently 78 coming on stream this year and anticipated maybe 75 or so for Governor Prince over the 10-year period. This proposal was based on a housing needs study completed in 2023 that likely used data older than that. Also, this proposal had no investment dollar projection for the 10-year effort. Going back to the first sentence, the 10 years would produce another 200 units. The Select Board at the time seems to have endorsed this plan. Is this plan actively being implemented? That's the first question. And then, do we have any sense of whether the new units will require capital investment from Orleans, and what magnitude could that be? And I'm not sure.
What's the Select Board and Town Administration's point of view today?
Okay, yeah, okay. What's the Select Board's and Town Administration point of view today?
Okay, well, this one is also pretty straightforward, actually. So the first question is this plan actively being implemented? And I answered the question as yes, if you consider the fact that the town of Orleans has already hit its target minimums on building affordable housing for the community. But the larger picture is the need to increase additional units over a certain amount of time. The way that we believe that occurs in the community is through changing zoning and increasing density. It is not through, I mean, some of it is additional construction, but the majority of it is zoning and density changes. So to the extent that there would be additional capital needs to create those additional 200 units, I don't see much of a correlation, because the key areas that we are considering changing the zoning in are, the main sections of the community that are already in plan to be sewered.
Any questions? Sure, Ed.
Excuse me. So Kim, we've satisfied our affordable housing minimum with the building that we're doing now. Does the state or federal government have programs that would subsidize the cost of this housing that we're anticipating going forward?
I guess yes is the answer, but it's impossible to know, really, right? So we can only really speak to the projects that we currently have in the queue, right, that we're working on related to housing. And we absolutely are receiving different types of funding from the state or feds for those projects, right? What that means 6 months from now or a year from now for a new project, right? It's too hard to know.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
Let me ask, that was a poorly asked question on my part. There's some law or regulation that says the town must have X number units of affordable housing. And there's penalties potentially for failing that. On the other side of the equation, are there benefits by exceeding that.
I don't think that,
So let's just say there's the only penalty in not hitting the 10% minimum on affordable housing is the lack of the ability to control whether or not a 40B gets developed in your community.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah. That's what I view as
So-
a penalty.
Yes. So you've already crossed that threshold, right? I think there is a much larger conversation that everyone wants to have about housing. You really want to have it with the experts in the room. And I can tell you that Elizabeth is a superstar who could tell you the ins and outs of every piece of funding or programming related to housing and the nuances as it relates to this community. I think what everybody is trying to figure out is, how are we going to balance this in the future, and is it a top priority, right? But that's a much larger question, right? And so I think we'll get through some of that as we're talking about capital, right? I think, everything we're talking about today now hangs sort of under a cloud of uncertainty about what's coming in the immediate future, right? And how we actually identify what's a priority and what isn't, right? We have that all in the back of our minds. And so, I think I know what this question is about. I think we all know what this question is about. But again, time is going to give us a little more indication of what's really coming, right? So we can talk about that a little bit more, maybe when we talk about, the articles on the warrant.
One other question, Kim, that relates to the housing, and this might be an Elizabeth question. If the town is expecting the zoning and density to help build affordable housing, I would think the private sector would want to be building condos that are what we are seeing being built now, $1 million plus condos, as opposed to affordable housing, given the cost of the land.
Right. So I think that's a good point, actually. I think it's important when we're here to different, it's not just affordable housing units that need to be created in the housing production plan, okay?
Right.
It's market rate units as well. And we've talked about this in this group before, but there is absolutely, and there will be, the influx of private development to meet our goals related to this housing. It is not done by the town alone. And so some of the projects that we are even considering, and one of them is on the capital plan, we'll talk about it a little bit later, is really about sort of being the intermediary in between, having a parcel or a piece of property that has the ability to serve a purpose to the community, but also be developed for private units, right, and used for market rate housing. It's the combination of those, right? But I feel very fortunate to have a very talented staff that knows all the ins and outs of this. I think we got very lucky there. So it's going to be interesting in the next 5 years or so as the field changes, right, in terms of what gets built and what doesn't, right, and what gets subsidized and what doesn't. I'm glad to have a person that does that as a full-time job. Let's put it that way, right?
Cheryl, you have the questions in front of you. Do you want to do question 3?
Sure. Town administration staffing has increased. What do you see down the road in terms of increasing staffing, short-term and long-term, and what is the impact on future budgeting?
So I wasn't sure, so I asked Elaine the other day if this was a question specifically related to my office or the town as a whole, but we can talk about both of them just so that it's clear. So the town manager's office had 4.5 FTEs when I arrived here. It currently has 6. One of the town meetings fall ago, we increased a half position for recreation. That half position for recreation was combined with the half position that was in the manager's office, and so that created 1 FTE that is currently the other position that sits in the front of the manager's office. It currently does both roles, both recreation and the manager's office, and also now HR for the purposes. The other position is the assistant planning position that was supposed to be specific for economic development that was approved in the budget cycle last year. We moved that position into the manager's office to do economic development so that it could also do public information. It could do 2 roles in one. So that's the additional 1.5 FTEs that's in the office. So they're not new in addition. They're sort of hybrid positions, taking 2 positions and put them into 1, right? And then move some locations. We do have some, in terms of additional staffing, I mean, the firefighters obviously is the largest increase that we talk about, but we've had a lot of reclassifications of positions, but not new additions of positions. Any of the additions that we've talked about were ones that were at town meetings. So recreation, you remember, and then the HR department, you'll remember from a couple falls ago. That was also created at those meetings. There haven't really been any other ones that I can think of. Maybe the sewer position that we created, that's paid half through sewer and half through the health department, right? That we did mid-year.
And do you
But
anticipate?
you'll see a lot of new titles and a lot of new faces. What's happening is we'll recruit and there's a new job title, right? That's sort of got more responsibilities mixed into it. So let me give you a perfect example. Last year we take a retirement like in the DPW in a position that was previously assistant highway manager, and we reclassify that job into deputy DPW director, right? Same 1 FTE, more responsibility, stays within that same group, but then we are sort of building on our succession plan. So we're actually done pretty well. We've got a couple of other departments we're going to start focusing on in the next couple of years, but we actually think we're pretty close. Some of this we have to negotiate now because of change in duties. So, you know, it takes a little bit, but I actually feel pretty good. I feel like we're 80% done. So.
Great. Any questions? David, do you have the questions?
I haven't.
Do you want to do them 4?
Sure. The fourth, have you completed contract negotiations? What impact will these should have said contracts actually, have on the budget? It's a typo.
Okay, well, no, completed, not even close. So we are currently negotiating. We have 5 unions, and then we have 5 individually contract or separate employment agreement employees, and then we have all the personnel bylaw employees, and then we have basically everybody else. So we have everyone. I think you've heard me say this before. I've never seen a hiring market like this before. It's particularly around public safety. We are in an incredibly competitive environment. And I think I mentioned the troubling sign is that the rest of the Commonwealth is also catching up in terms of wages that are being paid in compensation packages. And that's very bad for us because we need to be higher than the rest of the Commonwealth because of our housing market. And so there's no easy way to say this, which is it's going to be expensive, which is why we need an override. But the only way that we can sort of manage it is to sort of get on the same plan as our neighbors in Eastham and Brewster do, which is to plan for something every 3 years so that we can really get a sense of, you know, what's manageable and what isn't. I mean, it's unbelievable. But I am hoping, best case scenario, that we have, I think we could probably have 3 of the main groups done by May. Typically, public safety contracts take longer because there's more nuances in there. And quite frankly, those are the ones that jump the most, right? And I'm anticipating that. So I can tell you that we are seeing, we have every comp for every community that is out here on the Cape that we use. And we have all of the data for the most recent contracts that have been settled out of either the JLMC, which is the Joint Management Labor Committee. So let me just take one little second. So this mediation and arbitration for town employee contracts, okay? The police and fire specifically have something separate, something different than the rest of other contracts do. They have something called the JLMC, which is where we would go if we went to mediation. And those awards, there are binding arbitration when they go, okay? So what that means is, if we can't settle a contract on our own together, we then go to this other court essentially, and then they dictate what we have to pay, right? The rest of the employee contracts don't have binding arbitration. They just have mediation. Okay. So like I say that only because it's important when these things do jump, we end up paying them one way or another. Right. So we really do try to settle these contracts on our own in the best possible way beforehand. Sometimes that number is just too large for us to stomach on our own, obviously. So then we do go to mediation or to arbitration to sort of get some relief. Right. And I can tell you that some of the awards that I heard about at the MMA conference last week coming out of the JLMC for public safety contracts made my jaw drop. So, not great news. But we do have that money in the reserve for negotiations. That is why it's so high. What I would tell you is, and I'm focusing on the public safety piece the most because that is the area, and I know you had Scott in here already, and you'll have Jeff. There are not enough people going into these fields. If they are not out here on the Cape already, and we cannot attract them and retain them ourselves, there is no other pot to go to get them. They are not going into school fast enough. It is absolutely critical that we try to find ways to be creative about recruiting for public safety in particular, right? DPW too, because of the licensing, think about the water plant and the sewer plant, really some specialized fields that we can't live without that have to be prioritized, right? And so, that's not to say the other employees in the contracts aren't as important. They are, but there's a little more flexibility in those, right? Like public safety is paramount, and we can't have first responders driving from over the bridge. So, yeah, there's not a lot of great news in there. Sorry. I know,
Comment?
but yeah.
Yeah, David?
I just think you're making a good case for down the road, creating more housing.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the other part. Are we already too late, right? Who knows? That's the question about housing. Are we actually going to attract young families from off Cape to now move on Cape? Like, that seems like a stretch, but hopefully if we had some jobs, maybe, right? It's so hard to say. So.
Can I make a comment? So recruit, retain, so if the accent now is on retaining and retention, I hear you talk a lot about pay. I'm hearing from the community, the buzz about more, how much vacation time they have, and the insurance, the health insurance, the 65, 35 versus 75, 25. So is there any thought of checking out health insurance to go with something different? Are you thinking maybe?
So I cannot reveal the bargaining position that the town has right now, but there's no chance that I haven't thought of every single creative possible option on the table in order to be an employer of choice out here on the Cape. So you can be assured that there is a health insurance component in there. There is a parental leave component in there. There is many different pieces beyond just wages, right? Because retention is the key, particularly in public safety, in that 3 to 5 year window where we've invested the money in some great candidates to go and get trained and go to school and come back. And then they basically are jumping because another community will pay more, right? That isn't, we have to find better ways to make it worth their while. The goal is to get them to work here and basically convince them never to leave, right? And that's what we're trying to do.
Well,
trying to make a
we do have
workplace-
beautiful weather here, and being
Honestly-
being a new hire gets 2 weeks vacation time. That's just not enough in today's workplace marketplace.
It is the industry standard. I mean, quite honestly, 2 weeks is pretty typical. But municipalities, the maximum of vacation time that even 25-year employees get is 5 weeks. There's not a lot of wiggle room. These are pretty standardized, right? But we are looking at all the different possible ways to
good.
sort of do that.
Yeah.
You
I'm just flushing it out for everyone to hear. That's all.
No, you can. Beth will give you a head nod, but the number of things that I bring forward that seem like really strange ideas about sort of how we can be creative are a lot.
Great.
But the goal, we've been very lucky, and we have I have to tell you, the department heads here and the staff, it's a really great working group here. And so I think we do offer something that other communities don't. And so that's what we want to maintain. So I'm working on it in other ways too.
Kim, if I could just throw in a couple of extra points. I believe the last time we talked to Scott McDonald, the police are down 5 positions. And the cost that we've always worked with for a new hire, to bring in an untrained person and bring them up, is $100,000. So that's money down the drain if 2 years later they go to another town.
Well, to add one, since we're talking about adding information for the hypersphere, today's local newspapers, the two that affect us, Cape Cod Chronicle and Provincetown Independence, they have at least 3 articles that I saw with announcements of additional either firefighters or policemen in our immediate neighborhood other than us. So, it's a tough proposition.
Okay. Chris, do you have a copy of the questions?
I've got it, he's got it up.
You want to read the number 5 one?
No, this is fine, as long as
Okay.
he's still willing to share. I don't know, if I say something out of
I'm
line,
not sure.
my access may end.
Please.
It's just like a game show. I love it.
I don't want to do it all.
So many random questions. It's good.
Yeah. So Chris, you're on for 5.
Want to read
Oh,
number
5.
Yeah.
We've been hearing noises that Orleans subsidizes housing for some employees. How many of our town employees live in subsidized housing? How is that accounted for in compensation? How do you structure housing as compensation? How do we structure housing? Okay.
So we have one employee that gets housing, and they have a lease with the Conservation Commission for, and they pay rent to that group. We do not compensate. It is not related to their compensation package for the town at all. It's a separate agreement from the town. Though Elaine did point out to me yesterday or the other day that what about lifeguards? Well, that's true. I had not thought about them at all in this conversation. We offer housing to lifeguards, right? I'm not even sure what the situation is in terms of rent over there. I think it's a first come, first served basis for the number of rooms that are available for use, but not quite sure what the financial arrangements are there. But in terms of a benefit to employees, we only have the one.
Okay.
I've heard those same rumblings, don't you worry. I hear them all the time.
Okay. Any questions?
If only it was true.
We're working on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Ed,
Love
what did you-
that. I would love that rumor to be true about Tonsit. I would love it. to
You
be
know,
true.
I was going to say too, even the lifeguards, it's amazing that you still get them. I mean, I spend a lot of time in other places that it's just other towns, other, lakeside or oceanside communities that have given up on lifeguard guarding the beaches because they can't find enough people with the proper training because of all the training they need now for, it's practically an EMT course to be a lifeguard. And so I'm just happy that we still have that. And
Yeah, and that they're national champions.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's amazing.
So, yeah. We are working on some other things. We'll talk about it when we get to Capitol.
Okay.
Let's-
Ed, what did you number 6?
Ready for the next one?
Yep.
What is the status of 72 Tonsit Road? What is the status of town plans for housing on this property?
We have no plans for housing at 72 Tonsit. We bought Tonsit for the water access at the location. The current status of Tonsit is that we're using it for storage because we can't leave it vacant. So Natural Resources is storing some equipment in the basement over there. The determination on future use for the building is really secondary as to figuring out how we can really configure the site to get the water access that we want for the community.
But it's a functional home, yes? Could someone be living there, or is there a stricture by which they could not be?
Nope, they cannot be living there. We'd have to carry, well, at this point, they could not be living there because they're, it would be very difficult to get the level of insurance we need in order to ensure a structure of that age and quality, and then have municipal use that is housing related with it. It's a sort of a, if you can imagine, even though this housing discussion is like been topical the last couple of years out here, it's sort of a very new area for municipal insurers to have to start considering, of all the strange things that towns do, right? This is the one we're asking about now. And in fact, until this Municipal Empowerment Act, if it gets passed or not, I mean, you had to get special legislation in order to provide housing for municipal employees. So, it's more nuanced than it needs to be is the answer. I think the select board will want to consider something in the future for the space that might have a housing component to it. Having been over there myself, it's a beautiful location. But I think it probably needs public bathrooms, and it probably needs, multi-accessible access. So a lot of pieces, right, to making it a usable town building, right? So.
Any questions? So the status of 22 Old Tote Road?
That's a project that's with the Affordable Housing Trust.
Okay. And then I'll do the next one too and pass it off. Does any of the real estate class 9600 churches and synagogues that are tax exempt pay a compensatory amount of in lieu of taxes as a contribution to town services? Are there any other classes of real estate that are tax exempt?
Hold on, I sent this to Brad, and he answered. Now I just have to find the email. Unless Jen has it. Okay, he says in his email, religious organizations in Orleans are not charged pilots. We only have one active pilot agreement in place for the Orleans Housing Authority properties. Are there any other classes of real estate that are tax exempt? Charitable, benevolent, educational, literary, temperance, or scientific organizations all qualify for exempt status under MGL laws. We have 35 properties in town that are tax exempt under these parameters, while the OCT holds an additional 202 exempt vacant parcels. This remainder of our Orleans exempt properties are owned by local, state, and federal governments.
So no.
So no. So nobody,
Yes, that's-
none of the churches pay any compensatory. I'm thinking about churches and colleges, universities that pay taxes in towns.
They
as
don't pay,
in-
they don't pay taxes. They pay amounts in lieu of services. You know?
So is there any thought of a compensatory amount?
Not that I haven't had a conversation about that since I've been here. And I don't think the board has had a conversation about it, but I think
we're throwing it out there, Kim. We're throwing it out there. If the church has a fire, they need our service. If,
Just so you know, that's entirely voluntary.
yeah,
They have to step forward, the town can't make them.
Yeah.
that's how Boston works?
And those things usually are for universities and other organizations that occupy vast acreage of, and parts of whole towns. When you talk about Harvard, you're talking about, I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of acres it is, but and how many people it is. Thousands and thousands of people, right? 10,000 people, maybe, including, it's a lot.
It's a
So
population.
that's a different, it's a whole different level of things than when we talk about, charities on the Cape.
I wonder what the rest of the Commonwealth does in terms of the classification 9600 and having them be 100% tax exempt.
Look,
I don't know, we are thinking about just in terms of revenue.
Well, we know now. Now we know. Yeah. Thank you.
So, Nick, want to do 9?
Oh, item 9, question 9 is, relates to the short-term rentals. And we know that you're planning a short-term rental warrant article. And the question is really, how we're going to structure that. What are your thoughts about that? We know that there's a big gap between what the state reports as short-term rentals and what we have had, what registrations we have in town. So how do we close the gap as a
So-
first step?
The way that communities close that gap is by contracting with a firm like Granicus, which we just recently did, that basically goes and data mines all of the information related to short-term rentals in your community, right? Then we take that data, we have that number, so we know what the exact gap is. We'll have more data that, like, you know, we'll know what's an investment property versus what's a person's second home. We will know all of the pieces of data related to the ownership related to those homes through that data collection. So the next part of that is, what are we thinking in terms of that for May? Well, we're working on an article, bylaw change. Involves the fire department, the health department, assessing it, planning. We're all part of a group related to, figuring out the structure of what we want to bring forward in May. Obviously, it's going to include a registration component that involves a fee that it doesn't currently involve, but we aren't there yet in terms of knowing exactly how much, for who, and how do you determine that. We are in the early stages, but I can tell you the main reason that we're bringing it forward for short-term rentals is due to safety concerns, not just financial concerns.
Question? Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Dave.
So do you have the data from Granicus now?
No, we just signed the contract. We have
Okay.
let me put it this way. We have a general idea, right? Because these firms who do this work send us sort of that as a, to dangle a carrot. Just about 30 days ago or so, I signed the contract to move forward now so that we would have the data for May, right? We sort of moved very quickly on this, which is when we started talking about residential property tax exemption, I sort of leaned heavy into, well, this is the first step. We've got to move now then. And so that's how we got here. So we'll have it.
just for projection, and maybe you can't say, but we've heard that it's somewhere around half or doubled. Is that wildly off?
What part, what's more, the number of properties?
Number
that
of
are?
properties. Yeah.
So what's interesting is it actually declined last year based upon our latest data from the assessor in real time, but it is based upon, actual registered short-term rentals. That does not quantify the number that are not officially short-term rentals, right? Or ones that are not in the registration. We think there's probably potentially up to a third of the properties are not currently registered.
Thank you.
I think both the Commonwealth's registration list and our registration list is inaccurate. The Commonwealth's may have stale data. I don't think the Commonwealth really refreshes its registration list very seriously. So I think a lot of this is guessing. I think errors and flaws occurred on both sides, our list and the Commonwealth's list. And I think the best idea is to get an expert to come in and say,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
here's the legit. Don't think that we have a
Yeah.
bunch of non-registrants because we're half of what the Commonwealth has. Commonwealth might have stuff from the 1800s.
Yeah, I was just trying to get a
and I
sense of
think-
what she thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the Commonwealth's data actually comes through their taxes. I think that's how they keep track, through that number. So you'd have to be people that are potentially claiming income related to the rentals. So if you assume how many people aren't claiming that or not using a platform like an Airbnb or a Vrbo, right? But again, I think there's an important little carve out here that we really want to be cognizant of, which is we are very aware that our neighbors did not all buy their homes as investment properties, and a lot of them are using their primary houses sometimes to offset the costs of just living on the Cape, right? We want to make sure we create some room for them, right? This is really about investment properties, right? And second homes that are being utilized in a way that are a generation of income specifically, right? Just for that purpose. And so I know there's some nervousness around that. So we're trying to be as comprehensive as we can with what we bring forward as a bylaw to really make sure that we don't, we're not trying to hurt anyone, basically. We're just trying to create a safer environment and get these things regulated in the right way. So, and actually get a sense of what the impact is to the community so that we can plan for it, right? So.
Shall I do 10?
Okay, next one. Would you please share your position of the resident tax exemption that has been initiated by several neighboring towns? The select board seemed to request some further input for such a decision. Eastham.
So I'm not going to take this bait. So select board doesn't currently have a position on residential property tax exemption, and therefore neither do I. But what I will say is I absolutely believe that the very first step in this process, in order to actually understand what we're talking about, is to be able to recognize how much the short-term rental market is really a commercial market and what the shift would really mean. We have to know how many of these homes are really residential and how many are actually listed as residential but are commercial enterprises, right? That is critical to making sure we get the data we need to make the right decision on residential property tax exemption. Meph is here. I'm sure he would love to tell you his position on it.
You can tell he's loving it already.
So I've been pushing this for probably 4 years now anyways, and the select board's never taken a vote. And I don't know how that vote would come out if we had it tomorrow, but I think that for the future of people trying to have a year-round community here in Orleans, this is something that actually must happen. Saving our year-round community is going to be a real challenge, and this is one way to help it. That's just my pitch, but.
Could I do a follow-up question?
Sure, I thought Chris had first.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, if I could just jump in, I have to say that I agree with Meph on this. It's a lot of states freeze the assessment and only allow your taxes, your residential taxes, to go up 2.5%, say, per year. That's just an inflation factor, but the actual assessment stays the same as long as you own your house.
Right.
And that's the real way to control this. Now, that's not the way Massachusetts does it. We have Proposition 2.5 that allows town meeting to just override stuff, and, it doesn't limit what the actual person pays because it doesn't automatically restrict the town budget in a way that a lot of other states that I've been in do, and I'm always surprised by how they control that for this very reason, that to preserve communities, in their state, and we don't have that state law provision, so there's other ways around it, and this is one, and I would hope that we would pursue it a little more effectively, and if it has to be 100 signatures at the Land Ho on a Friday to get it on the warrant, that may be.
Well, let me take that one. So this tax classification gets set by the select board. The town meeting can't compel the select board to take a vote.
Okay.
So a citizen's petition, but I'll also say this, it's not necessary, because I think the board, both Meph and I have spoken about this, right? And I sort of feel it's inevitable, at least to bring forward in the next couple of years, to be responsible, right, to provide the option. So I do think it's coming. When and how, that's the question, right? I had told Meph 3 years, he would like it much sooner. And as soon as I get the short-term rental situation under control, then the very next step would be to see how that data impacts this change, right? So,
Can I just add two things? The select board has the power to make that vote and impose it. But a couple of years ago, when we had this discussion, there were people on the board that felt that even though we would have the authority, that it should be a town meeting decision.
right.
I don't
And I had thought so
personally
too,
agree with
but-
that, but I understand it. The other thing is that if we did vote tomorrow to put this in, how long would it take Kim to actually be in place?
I don't know. It's like you have to go through a whole year, and then so there's something to do with 6 months, and then you have to have a certain amount set aside and overlay in order to be able to absorb a lot of the shift related to it, right? And so I'm not sure what that data amount is, but I think, let's put it this way, it's more than just an exercise we're going to be doing this next time around, right? So I'm encouraged that people are thinking of creative ways, and it's been a rapid progress in terms of what people are willing to look at in the 18 months I've been here. So I think just like everything else we do, we should absolutely put it together as an option. The board can take a look at it and see if it makes sense, right? And then we can move on it.
So what I wanted to say was that you sort of answered my question, because you had indicated at a prior meeting it was be 3 years, and I wasn't sure if that was due to you just can't do it any faster, or it was more of a policy decision. And so I'm glad to hear that it can be done a good bit faster than that, even though it does take time. So I would just encourage that to happen. Thank you.
Kim, doesn't it need to go to the state to be approved?
So
I seem to
to
remember
me,
Nantucket going to the state.
those pieces are sort of secondary, right?
Okay.
It's just tax. It's actually just tax classification. It just has to be approved like a regular tax classification would be. But it's secondary because we're talking about really wanting to shift. This is why it's sort of, you want to shift the property tax in order to really protect year-round residents and identify the amount of the population that's sort of seasonal or investor. At the same time, we aren't charging for short-term rentals for registration, right? There's a really big gap here in terms of what we're talking about, because we don't have, we're not even doing the basics on the short-term rentals in terms of quantifying, but then we're talking about recognizing that it's such a significant issue in our community that we want to consider a different tax classification, right? There's some work we need to do in here first. And that's what I was saying 3 years for, is I was thinking of a 3-year town meeting cycle. I actually didn't know that we would move as quickly as we are on short-term rentals for this May, because when we talked about it even 6 months ago, it was sort of like, nope, don't touch. So now I'm more encouraged than I was even a couple months ago. And now that I've seen other communities also doing it, I'm certainly paying attention, right? So,
Yeah.
and MEF has never been happy with 3 years.
No, and I would say that I think the real estate exemption is an idea that's warranted regardless of short-term rentals. It's a seasonal community. Half the people who live here are competing with people from outside of town for housing. And I think the cost, the sort of social cost to this community has been way unrecognized, very unrecognized.
Great.
So David, number 11?
Sure. Yeah, so why are the costs, at least the budgeted costs for electricity so high? It appears that they've gone up as much as 3 times. If these I'm not sure if this is worded correctly, fees are not used, I guess costs are not used, will that excess flow into free cash?
So I think we all know why, right? But I'll say it anyway. We got a 66% rate increase last year, right? We are in the Cape Light Compact with other communities. So our increase over the length of it was 66%. I think that's sort of catching residential markets catching up now too. not much we can do about that. We could talk about solar or all these other pieces of great communities, but the answer is, does it flow to free cash? Yes. Anything in the operating budget, in the operating budget that doesn't get spent goes to free cash.
Okay, any questions? Okay. Chris, want to do 12?
At the May 19 town meeting, Orleans committed to creating a special purpose stabilization fund for water usage. Water using 100% of the local options room excise tax beginning July 1st, 2019, not to be revoked for at least 3 years. Since this agreement has expired, have we determined how this tax will continue to be used? And is this STR tax continuing to roll into this stabilization fund? And so forth.
Okay.
Wordy.
So I think the question is, when can we get some of this short-term rental money, right? So something other than the sewer project. Is that the question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Good, we like that.
right. Yeah, so the reality is we are in the very early stages still of the sewer project. We're just starting to get flow online, right? We gave an additional year for people to get connected. So the reality is every single cent of what's going into that $1.72 million that's coming in through the short-term rental is needed right now to subsidize the costs in the sewer project. I do think that when properties start to come online and the flow starts to generate, we will get to a point, let's say, hopefully in a year or two, where we can revisit this conversation and say, maybe we cap it at 2 million or we cap it at 1.5, right? But we're not there. And if anyone is curious about the short-term rental, there's a whole page in the budget, once we post it online, that's specifically about this room tax and this short-term rental money. They can see how it comes in by quarter and then how much we bring in per year. But right now, 100% of it is needed for the sewer project.
Yeah, I think the context, at least for myself, of the question is, and I just learned this from somebody else in the housing committee, so not that I know that much, is why isn't it being used for housing? Because it seems that the short-term rentals are sort of the cause or one of the causes of the housing problem, and it seems somewhat odd to be using it to subsidize something else for people who already have houses. So you're not going to solve it tonight. I'm just laying it out there that when you say you're going to cap it at 2 million, I don't know what you meant by that, but so anyway, that's sort of the background to it.
It's a community's prerogative to determine what they use that funding for. A decision was made before I arrived to use that money to help get the sewer project moving. And quite honestly, you're ahead of a lot of communities right now, right? And their sewer project costs are a lot more than your startup costs were. So there is a lot of value to having made that vote in order to help the project move forward. The question is, should there be a shift back in fees? Should it be actually on the project? It's a little bit complicated, right? But that's at this point in time, because we need every cent of it for the project, because it's not really up and going yet, right? In the way we need it to. There's not much to debate yet, right? But I think in the future we should.
And might I say, part of the reason for it was that at the beginning of the sewer project, you may remember that pie that was showing why it wasn't going to fall to taxpayers to pay for it. And the short-term rental tax was 40% of the pie. And that's why the vote, I think, that's what promulgated, motivated this vote to make sure that that actually happened so that the taxpayers wouldn't have to pay for the sewers, which, that ship has sailed.
Of course, of course. I just think, you need, until you start to talk about it, you don't talk about it. So that's why we're bringing it up. Thank you.
But one other piece of that is there are, I think, a fair number of people who argue that going forward as sewer rates, as the sewer bills start getting out there, that they ultimately ought to be setting rates in a way that covers all the expenses plus the debt, like the water department does. So which I think probably is a good idea, but that is going to make a lot of unhappy people too.
Next.
Okay. Ed, number 13?
Lucky 13.
Yeah. Is our STR, short-term rental tax, as high as it can be? If not, what is our current thinking about reassessing this policy?
So I put a little note after this that said, we need to start with registration fees for the short-term rentals. So Elizabeth gave a presentation a couple of weeks ago, and maybe Meth you'll remember, but I don't know that we are at the maximum amount for the current fee for short-term rentals. I think there is an additional vote that we could take that captures something. It might be 1%, but I'm not sure. And I'll have to double check with her. But I'll just go back to my point from the beginning, which is we should be registering the short-term rentals and make sure that they are contributing to the short-term rental fund, right?
Absolutely, but if it were part of, if
yes.
there were another 1%, and we're getting, what is it, $1.5 million from
Yeah,
the short-term
but
rental,
I'm-
that's another 150,000.
No, but it might be specifically related to the districts that where it's going. I don't know the nuances of housing like she does. I mean, so.
My memory when this was set up was that it went to the max.
That's what I thought too.
Okay. But she had mentioned something at a meeting like a week ago that was about an additional 1% we could adopt, and that piqued my ears, but I never got to circle back on it.
We just want to make
but
sure
I
we're
don't know
getting
if-
all the money we can.
Well,
Yep.
but taxes have effects competitively, and you can't always be at the top end of taxing and spending on everything. So I'm just saying, part of the argument that came up with being at the max was it was going to make us uncompetitive with less competitive with some of the surrounding towns, because when people, spend $1,000 and 160 of it goes to the town, that's pretty stiff tax. Is it 16%?
But you gotta remember, the tax is not on the owners, it's on the visitors.
Right.
And
But the visitors come here and spend money, and our local businesses.
That's all I'm saying.
Make it and break it over the summer months.
Right.
Without them,
but the way they bill it, if they decide it's $2,000 a week, it's $2,000 a week plus tax,
Right.
plus cleaning, plus all this other stuff.
Right, the tenant pays all
they
that.
throw on there.
there comes a tipping point where you might not stay in Orleans, you might stay next door.
Then all of our towns should up at the same time.
We ought to compete for tourism,
That's a different
not try
different
to
conversation.
not have everybody drive them away.
Okay, so this is a long one. Is there a town-wide strategic plan in the works that forecasts the timing and estimated costs of operating budget need and capital investments? Going forward, the 20-year comprehensive plan, which is kind of like a wish plan, must be linked to a near-term town functioning with a rolling 5-year plan. As conceived in the past, the 20-year comprehensive plan was aspirational, not directly linked to the imminent operating capital needs. So this is asking about what and when about a strategic plan.
Okay, so first of all, comprehensive plans are aspirational plans.
Right,
Okay, they're not capital plans.
Right.
So, and a strategic plan is not a capital plan. So there's different pieces here. So comprehensive plan takes the input from the community, identifies the needs of the community as overall and the wants in the community, and then it breaks it down into categories and sort of sets goals for the future, right? It's aspirational seems like the wrong word. It's more like a helpful guideline for everybody to be on the same page, right? that we are required to do, by the way, required, right? We have started, and we do have, I mean, we have financial data and analysis that we could do, you know, out for 20 years at this point, right? Based upon growth and based upon known needs that we have at the time. The piece that I think is missing from all of this is thorough facilities assessment for the entire community on all of the parcels that we own. Not individual one-offs related to the buildings, right? And so that's really what's missing. So like, as I'm starting to get, you know, everything in line and sort of get a handle on where all the funding is and what the needs are, you know, getting a true updated analysis of, one, the future areas of growth within the community in which capital investment needs might need to be made. We're going to talk about that a little bit later too. And then two, you know, existing facilities and their current conditions beyond doing individual reports related to their, like, each one, right? I'm talking about everything. And we can do that through a community compact grant. So that might be coming too. I've already started looking at it a little bit. But we are planning, right? The state of the world is a little unknown at this moment in time, but we certainly are planning. That way. And we can put numbers on a piece of paper. That's what I say. We can certainly do and guesstimate parameters on what we think and our best estimates going forward, right? We really only can plan really 10-year window, which is really how I think in my head about timelines. And so, you know, I know this is a question about future capital projects, but honestly, we'll talk about it, like, we're already, I think I put this in the email. The problem with even doing facilities assessment and then sort of using that in order to determine what gets slotted in when, to determine which project should be next, is that you're already past the timeline that would be necessary for each of those projects to be slotted in, right? You've already passed your due date. So now they're all due, right? And so now the question becomes, what's the worst of the bunch, right? That's a terrible place to be in. And so, you know, we do need to get more data that would help us determine that. But honestly, at this point in time, based upon our known variables, like the fire rescue station, our focus is pretty centered on what are critical needs that need to be addressed rather than wants for the future. So I think we'll talk about that more when we talk about capital.
David, want to do 15?
If real estate tax valuations continue to grow even modestly, will that cover us for future overrides? And then,
Not a chance.
okay, that's quick. Are continuing compensation-related overrides our future?
Yes, and I think I heard a statistic at MMA, I was saying this last week, that the DLS is expecting a record number of overrides across the Commonwealth this year for all the communities, right, in Massachusetts. So, I mean, the very basic way to say this is Prop 2.5, we talked about this a minute ago. I mean, 2.5 is 2.5, and then you have new growth, and then you have local receipts, okay? So if you can assume that everything has increased in cost beyond 2.5%, right? Think about retirement at 14%, then there really isn't a way for us to stay beneath the 2.5 as a guarantee for a certain number of years, right? Which is why communities are getting on these rolling 3-year averages. I mean, the truth of it for me is it's pretty shocking to see, because we're familiar with this because of schools having to do it for years, right? They were always doing operational overrides every 5 years or so, as far as, like, that was pretty common in the Commonwealth. Communities doing it, you know, and just to maintain their operating budget was rarer. Let's put it, it wasn't unheard of, but it was rarer. I mean, you guys have done them pretty regularly here, but, you know, as a mechanism. But now it's actually, we're sort of stuck in a system in which it's going to be necessary to maintain service levels. So, you know, there's some other parts of this that we could talk about, of areas that I think that I don't want to get into, about future reductions in terms of services in the community that I think will come in the future that might help us here, but that is all speculation, and I don't want people to get nervous about it at this time. We're talking 5 to 10 years out, right? And so I think the best that we can do is create a plan to prepare for every 3 years or so, and hope that we can subsidize as much as that as we can. I can tell you that I've been going through a lot of it, and cutting through what I can when I find it. So, yeah, I feel pretty good about the numbers at this point. Not good, but at least more solid than I did a year about knowing that the numbers were good to make decisions off of.
Michelle, want to do 16?
So how do you choose to pursue grants? What recent grants have been awarded? What grants have been denied? And should we be considering engaging services of a professional grant writer?
This is my favorite municipal question. It's been asked in every state I've ever worked in every town I've ever worked in. There's always this concept that, and I get it. Is it possible that we're leaving money on the table by not applying for a grant somewhere to get it to help us pay for this stuff? I get it. No to the answer of hiring a professional grant writer. And let me just tell you why that doesn't work. Because the grants that we receive are very specifically targeted to departments in the town. So let's just use NATE as an example, because that's a grant that everyone's aware of, that $1 million that we just got for Rock Harbor. The federal programs and the state programs that we are eligible for in all of these categories, right? And let's just say 20 different ones, not private grants, but just those. We get regular notifications specifically emailed to us based upon the department or area that we're in. So Nate gets his and Rich will get them, right? We get them in sort of triplicate, right? And then you need the people who are the subject matter experts writing these grants. And what I'll tell you is, they're not like narratives in a novel. They're pretty boilerplate textbook narratives about what is the need, what is the cost, what would it do, what is the impact, what's your community's equalized valuation, it's that. So I will say though, since I've been here, we received a grant for dredging, like the first month that I was here, that was $1.7 million. Nate just got that $1 million. The fire department seems to get a grant once a week right now related to equipment needs. Like, we receive a lot of grants here. We got the regionalization grant. I think one of the things, and there used to be a list on the website that basically of the annual amount of grants that we get. But it's pretty substantial. Could we do better? Absolutely. Right. One of the questions was here, like, what grants have we been denied for and why? Well, I think we know the answer to that, but if we have to say it out loud, it's the community is viewed as affluent. And so we are not competitive in those rounds. And so something like the library grant, we never really were going to have a chance at, because the community can't afford its own library, right? It's as simple as that. We wish it was more nuanced in the sense of, like, could we at least get a shot at it? But it's not. It's really just, points on a scale. The SAFER grant that was talked about when we were adding the additional firefighters, that's another one. Though I did hear through the grapevine that actually that funding right now is frozen. So I guess it's good that you passed that override to fund the firefighters anyway. But, we absolutely do try. Whether it's $15,000 or it's $15 million, we do it as a regular course of our jobs.
Kim, let's look at the Rock Harbor renovation. So let's say that the Rock Harbor project comes in right on budget. It costs us $9 million, and we got a $1 million grant. Does that $1 million go into free cash?
No. So we just talked about this the other day. This is actually good for you, Ed, because this one is one of your things. My curiosity when I got here about why we were using so many bands rather than borrowing, right? So Rock Harbor is a perfect example of that, right? And I was like, why are we doing this? A bond is a bond anticipation note, basically. You're borrowing a certain amount up front, right, until you know the entirety of the amount that you want to borrow for the project. Rock Harbor is a perfect example because we're going to get a ban and then bond it. And then we got the award for the grant and then we could reduce the amount that we actually need to borrow. That's how that works. It's not as if we got the money, and then it goes out. And I will say, this is one, and it's a nightmare, I'm sure, and Jen could tell you. A lot of these grants are reimbursement grants, which makes it even trickier, which is we're spending it up front before we ever get it in, right? So that means we have to find a way within our budget, even though it's not really in the budget, to spend it to get it back. And so, it's one of the joys of municipal life. But I must sign, no joke, I must sign like a state grant form for something at least every other week here. Like, this community is I mean, there's a very, I constantly, in the beginning, was like, didn't I just do this? We sign a lot of them, but I talked to, because this is so topical, and it is, I get it. I talked to Amanda, who is the public information officer in my office. We're going to do a grants piece in the newsletter and do a little thing on it and really get a number out, because I do think I think it's substantial. And I think people should know more about it because it's always a natural curiosity.
So grants are used to reduce the total amount borrowed to fund a project. So in our example, we spend $9 million to rehab Rock Harbor. We have this $1 million grant that, thanks to Jen's bookkeeping and attention, we can fund it, get reimbursed, and apply it toward and so we're going to end up borrowing $8 million for Rock Harbor, correct?
Right.
All right.
Right. Other grants, are different though, but they're smaller. So it's like, but they're usually, if they're from, let's put it this way, if they're from the state, they're usually reimbursements. Let's put it that way, right? And grants are never very rarely we can't use them for anything operational. Right? They're usually project-based is the other part. So something like the SAFER grant is very interesting because it funds the first 3 years of a firefighter. We didn't get it anyway, but then the question always becomes, well, what happens in the fourth year, right? So that's an example of one that does would pay for operational, but then it drops. I actually would anticipate, it's total speculation, but 8 years ago, public safety in general was getting a lot of federal grants that were coming through for all kinds of things all the time, for positions and expansion of public safety in your communities, right? A lot of police gear. That might happen again, and then we'll be in some of those same questions again, which will be, do we add positions, right? And then what happens if there's no funding at the other side of it, right? So it's we wish they were oh, let us help you cover your cost of trash this week, but they're not, right? They will help you, let us make your trash streamline more efficient, right? So.
On this conversation, I just want to throw in that the state grant system for a lot of these things employs a formula. That's why we're perceived to be affluent, and it's a really flawed formula that I think the state is not willing to change. But we get every year we get the state. They used to call them cherry sheets, but the state distributions. And I asked Brad Heinout to look at the formula and calculate how much we don't get because of this formula, and he came up with $180,000 in a year. But that goes to no grant for the library, no grant for this or that, and that's all based on, once again, it's because the non-resident property owners are folded into the formula, and it skews the affluence calculation up. And so that's just another way in which sort of the year-round community is being hurt by the second home.
Chris, 17? I think it's Chris.
To what extent do you consider sharing resources and/or consolidating operations with neighboring towns? I didn't mean that in an evil way, it just came out that way.
I mean, what, you haven't heard the rumor that I'm stealing all their employees and trying to take over their operations? It's true.
That's not sharing, that's just theft.
It all the time is the answer to this question, and it is the future, right? That's the real question. It's like we can talk about. Let me just give you an example. That's hiring is top of mind right now. And I know we talk a lot about public safety, and we've been talking about like police and fire, and in with DPW. But DPW is a good example too. Something like building inspection. Just want to throw this one on here. There aren't enough building inspectors in the Commonwealth at all. None. Like none. And it's such a specialized field that requires so much certification and expertise that it's almost impossible to think that every single community is going to be able to have their own person who would leave their own private business and come and work for a community to be the building commissioner, right? It's ripe for a failure. So what we're doing now, and I'm very lucky to have recruited Davis from Brewster, right, back from Brewster. We are thinking about ways in which we hire at sort of apprenticeship level positions in these key departments so that the region benefits, right? And so that even if the program gets housed from one community, we are now have at least we have enough inspectors to go into different communities, right, that are getting trained from the one. Think of it in the succession planning. Now, it's very early, right, because it's not as if anyone else is saying, what are you going to do about building inspection, right? But it's a real fact. Like, the town stops if you can't issue building permits, right? And there are not people going into that field either. And so, when I meet with the other managers monthly, and I talk to Jackie and Peter weekly. So like we have a very good working relationship on a lot of things. We're already starting to share on recreation. You can see they're sort of by just naturally joining right up on programming. So like it's absolutely the future out here. I think it's going to be interesting in the next couple of years. I think we are going to really have the chance to sort of see what we could be a hub for, right? And beyond just education, I think, we are centrally located in a way that makes us a home base potentially for multiple municipal services. So looking forward to that. I actually like that stuff. So looking forward to it.
Any questions?
So, Ed?
Yep. Why did you change the Finance Committee reserve from $500,000 in fiscal year '25 to $350,000 in fiscal year '26?
It's actually $150,000. I don't know if you were trying to give me a hint, but I didn't take it.
I'm just reading what's here.
So the FinCom reserve was $80,000 in FY23, right?
Yep.
Last year when I got here, I said, we need room to be able to see what's in these budgets in real time in operations. So we used free cash to fund the additional $420,000 in the FinCom reserve. Now, I know you haven't really utilized it yet, but you will be using some of it as we get closer to the year end, right? The question was, what do we do for this year? Do we go back to 80? Do we keep it at 150? Do we use free cash, right? I still think we need a bit of a buffer as we're sort of realigning these departments, just in case, right? My concern is the lag time between town meetings. So I put 150 because I felt like that was a good number. Though I will tell you, we could certainly utilize the free cash for something else, but I do think we should have a buffer in there in case we need it. It's a reserve for a reason, right? And 80,000 isn't enough. What number is right? It's really just, you have to, like, you really are hedging in between, so I'll just go back in case there are new people who don't know. So the only times that we're really allowed to move money during the year are either a town meeting, so it may, a town meeting in the fall, or in the last 3 months of the fiscal year, we can do transfers. So that means there's some gaps in time where we might need additional funding from somewhere, and the only place to go to get that is the Finance Committee reserve. That's what it's there for. It's for unanticipated or emergency expenses that are beyond what you anticipated in your operating budget. So it was meant as a buffer for those areas. We can debate any number you want. Really, it's just it's a swag at this point. So.
Does the treasurer's office include debt service for all town borrowings? Does the fiscal '26 budget include the Rock Harbor renovation costs and all sewer-related costs? Does the treasurer's debt service forecast include debt service levels?
I was confused by this, but let me, so does the treasurer's office include debt service for all town borrowings? Do you mean, does the treasurer's office budget include debt service for all town borrowings? Is that the question? So
I would say, we have a section in the budget that's called debt service.
Yes.
I don't know where the question came from. Is all of the town debt service detailed in that debt service department?
So, yeah, so Ed, if you look, there's a new tab this year I added, I think it's in the sewer project, but there's a breakdown of so the debt service portion of the budget, when you see it, right, is just the payments that we owe on the loans that we took during the year, right? That's what that is. It's the payment portions in the debt service budget. It doesn't encapsulate the entirety of the debt that we owe. It's what we owe that year.
It's just the debt service, yeah.
Yeah, it's just the payments. Scott and Jen have a list and keep track of what those payments are, and that's where that number comes from in the budget. This year we did a little tweaking of it because we moved some of the debt to the enterprise funds, right? So we wanted to make sure that we, accounted for that in the right ways. So that's the first part of the question. So yes. So whatever is a ban or a borrow that has been executed in real time, but not authorized and borrowed, is in that debt service budget, okay? This next part about Rock Harbor, yes, is the answer to that. I think you saw that. And then a couple meetings ago, I'm sorry, I'm a little confused on the dates, Meph might know, Scott did a really great presentation at a select board meeting where he gave a list of everything that's a ban or a borrow for this year. I wish I had gotten it for tonight, but I can track that down if you don't have it. And then you can know exactly what's in there for FY26. Might be in the meeting minutes from that, but I can look and see then you can see exactly which is a ban and what's rolling over and what's not getting borrowed. He has a whole list. And then this next part is all sewer related costs. So the sewer's debt is now in the sewer budget, and there's a page for sewer debt right in that section of the budget that I added with detail. That's from Scott right in Gen 2. So you can see there's some notes in there about how much is from betterments and how much is from, so if you want to get into the sewer amounts, it's there. And then the last question is, does the treasurer's debt service forecast include debt service levels? So is this question about, are we tracking when debt's dropping off so that we can anticipate where to place things? Or is this about, yes is the answer. I mean, we have, we have all of the debt that is borrowed. Sort of Hilltop too provides an entire debt book related to the structure of the payments over the next whatever the life of the loans are for the duration of those. If there's a question in here about are we still working on trying to forecast and project out future debt related to projects and then when they might come online? The answer is yes. But I really want to get to May 1st and see what happens with the fire rescue station, right? I'm like laser focused on that project. So that, I mean, that's number one, right? So, but yes, I mean, we do, right?
Is this a correct, is this a correct summary? To find the total debt service that the town will have for fiscal year '26, you could look at the debt service line in the budget around town government, and then look at the enterprise funds to see what debt service each enterprise fund has. And although it's not an enterprise fund, it's similar, the water department's debt service number. So summing up those categories would get me to the total debt service that the town will be obligated to pay in fiscal year '26, correct?
Right. And then the only nuance in that is what is the funding source for which portion of which debt payment, right? So like water pays for some of the water, sewer pays for the sewer, betterments pay 20%. So like when Scott came in on Tuesday, it was, that's what we were saying about, so you know, it's about $30 for a fire station. That one's pretty easy to calculate, right? That's straightforward. But
It's a
like
breeze, yeah.
the sewer one is a little bit trickier because it's got different funding mechanisms in it.
Yeah, we could separate the capital management with the debt and debt service from the cash management for funding the payment. But on a capital management perspective, the debt service line up in the general operations area of the town, look at the enterprise funds, which I love seeing debt service in now. And then the water department has its debt service. So those
And CPC.
Yeah.
plus CPC?
Yeah. But CPC's debt is in the debt section of the operating budget.
So, you know,
Right.
like for the Peck property, are they paying the debt service on that?
Did we?
I
did
thought
we
it was
take
in the CPC's operating budget.
Okay, so yes, so before it was listed, the CPC's debt payments were listed in the general operating budget in the debt service section. We took it out this year,
Yeah.
so, and it's in the entire amount of the CPC. So what you need is that number, and it's like, what is it, like 360? What is the number?
360-ish?
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right,
360,000.
So now there are general enterprise funds, water department, and CPC.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
okay.
We could actually rename that line, the debt service in the enterprise funds, the ED line.
The Ed line.
I'm starting to learn your language, Ed. See, like I can figure out what you're asking. I'm like, I think it's what the question is. We're starting to speak the same language now, see?
Just keep it simple.
Yeah, I hear that.
How
All right.
how much of our budget is ultimately funded from the federal government, as in the school food programs, school transportation? What about grants that flow from the federal to the state or county to Orleans? Do you anticipate any change in this type of funding? And if yes, what areas, what departments would be impacted?
Okay.
That's a
So,
tough one. I mean,
also
you can
not
just
really
say,
gonna not really going to take the bait on this one either.
Yeah, I get it.
But I will say, because I already shared it with Ryan Bray, and then I shared it with the members of the board too. My actual thought about this is pretty simple, which is we receive about $800,000 right now in state aid. Okay, about $800K directly, right, through unrestricted government aid or school transportation. Okay. We receive all kinds of different types of grants, but we just talked about that they're not specifically for operations, right? So like it's not an operational impact from grants, loss of grants that we would see, right? There is, but it's not. The thing that I'm actually concerned about, that I think is more of a real possibility, because we've seen this happen in the Commonwealth before, is unfunded mandates that get shifted from the state level to the municipal level. So I say it in this way. Massachusetts is a state that offers a lot of programming and a lot of services, right? as the shift potentially occurs from the federal government more towards the states, which could happen, what will happen, I imagine, is that there won't be a strong push to want to reduce service levels right away. And what that means is the burden might shift more to municipalities to pick up, right? Which is what we saw happen with education over the last 20 years. So I'm less worried about something like, oh no, the bridge isn't going to get its, that's an issue. We're concerned about that, right? But in terms for us, what I'm worried about is sort of the creep that comes over, right? And then there's no way that we can possibly take on those additional pieces, which towns could do, and maybe we could manage them better, under 2.5. Okay, that's the part of the problem. And so if we got to a point where we were now expected to pick up some of the service pieces and under the restrictions we currently have and shift that locally, that's a recipe that isn't good for service levels in our community, right? So that's the best that I can say that is neutral, which is that's actually what I would worry about more than losing some big grant opportunity.
I think the next one is easier. We understand that
This is great. I'm loving it. I'm being on Jeopardy.
We understand that the fiscal 26 town warrant will include 40 million plus for the design and build for the new fire station. Let's assume that we get approval on May 12th or whatever it is. How soon can you start moving on that?
Well, I'll quote the chief from Tuesday. He said he has a shovel in his car. And I think that's the general sentiment, which is we want to go last year. Like, that we will move as fast as we possibly can. And because we have some concern about all the things we just talked about in the previous, we don't want the cost to escalate any further or make anything to make building this station any more difficult. We have to move on it now for a number of different reasons. And it is a critical feature of the community that you cannot live without for the next 20 years. It has to get done. And if it doesn't get done soon, the cost, and I don't even know how we would manage. You want to talk about regionalized? I mean, there's so many scenarios that I don't want to think about related to fire rescue if we don't execute this in May. So hopefully we will. So fast is the answer to your question. Very easy question.
So we are ready. I mean, the first step is to contract for a design. Is that what we do?
So we did get an email about separating them out and doing it in phases. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do design and then build. I want to pass and get the authorization for the entire station all at once so that it doesn't become in jeopardy later on for whatever reason. Like this, the line has to be drawn about the need for this building. It's critical. And so it doesn't, because we don't borrow it all, right, this year, it's just being authorized in this year. So the borrowing will happen over any number of years anyway. So it's just the authorization to borrow the amount related to the station. So the timing doesn't really matter. Just the authorization does. And then we would, like I said, we would go as fast as we possibly could.
Questions?
I move we approve it. I'm just
Go, done. I'm just gonna.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Vote for Chris.
Yeah, thanks for coming tonight. Approved.
Okay, Cheryl.
Discuss the logic, would you please, s'il vous
Oh,
plaît,
boy.
of separating the school budget from the operating budget, unless you want to just not do this.
I will talk
You want to
about
discuss
this
it?
one.
All right.
Of course, this is really great. So many eggshells to walk on. So the logic here is the same one that we talked about last year, right? At this time about the budget. It's about the mechanisms in how we approve budgets. That's period, right? This isn't about any concerns about education or about a future building. It is literally about what current process do you have in place related to how you approve an education budget. Right now, because the district's budget is within the town's budget, it's one vote, and you have very little leeway in helping to persuade them to reconsider their numbers. We are in a region of 4, and we are, if you ask the state, affluent. And so some of our neighbors are in a little bit, and it could be us eventually, in the trickier situations when it comes to enrollments and costs related, and they might not be able to afford the same level that we could afford. And what we don't want to do is potentially force one of our neighbors to have to cut service levels to maintain a school budget level. Right? This is what I'm familiar with in a previous community where we were the community without the money, right? That every year the process came around where the neighboring community could afford it and we couldn't. And if it passed, we would have to cut town operations, right? As these conversations move forward in the future about service levels, and things might get more difficult over the next couple of years, you want to have the ability to have that conversation and have them separated so that the school services or the towns are not really at odds with each other, right? They are legitimate conversations about the value of the services in either one individually. And then you can approve them either one individually, right? We don't want to be stuck. We don't want to be saddled with them. And we don't want to saddle our neighbors in a group. The question is, does it make sense to do it this May while we're, waiting on a new superintendent and we are, waiting to see what the future brings? I think any time is a good time, but, it seems like we got a lot of nervous energy back last time when we were talking about it, right? That got shifted into a conversation about the district or the elementary school. None of this is intended for that. This is literally about funding going forward, right? Budgeting, right? Accountability for our budgets. So, I said it last time, I want to be accountable for the town's budget, right? That's what I want, right? If our increase is 4.2% or whatever, I want to be able to tell you why and justify it and then make the case on the floor and sell it and get it to pass. What I don't want to do is have my overall budget go up 8% and now I have to defend something that I had no control over, right? So, or it looks like our budget has increased X amount. Ed was so great to point that out on the floor last year about how the budget's increased 12% over the last, yes, but not mine. And so it's a valid point because most people don't know, right? They're not here in these rooms with us having these conversations about what increased and what didn't. All they're seeing is a number, right? And they're saying, whoa, this is all going up too much. And so it makes it harder to do our jobs on this side, right? But do I think it's critical and needs to be done immediately? I think it's coming. This is another one, right? It's in the next couple years, you got some big choices to make around here about how you do your processes. So, but I certainly don't want to drive it, but I think it's of value if you do it, right? So let's put it that way.
Thank you.
Any comments or questions? So that is the end of our list of questions, and it being 8:45, I might suggest that we discuss taking the rest of our agenda, review and discuss future goals till the next time, and suggest, Kim, that you come back and review the actual capital budget with us, because I think we all want to see and have a conversation around what that is. And perhaps you would be available to come on March 13th at 5:30 to do that part with us, as opposed to starting in with it now at 8:45.
So
I think
What is that?
it'd also be good for us to invite the housing representative here.
Absolutely,
Have a discussion about
absolutely.
housing and
But
funding.
in terms of how our schedule is.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of how our schedule is working right now, on February 27th, we have scheduled Jeff Deering. It might be, Kim, given what Jeff said about it being difficult for him to come on the 27th, if you were available, have you come on the 27th and slide Jeff out to the 13th.
So
Any comments?
here's the thing.
Fine.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to talk about the budget though.
Right.
Like, I mean, we don't have to, but like, the days in which, I would rather hit some of the high notes now, right? Like, I don't want misinformation to be out in the community. So if we're going to have another meeting we had a capital budget meeting on Tuesday, I would recommend that anyone
People watch it.
that hasn't seen that to watch that. Because I don't know if the questions about capital, so again, about the capital budget for FY26 or about the CIP plan. Because if your questions are about pieces of equipment or things that we're buying in the year that are really articles for the town meeting, right? We have a little more time. If your question is about, well, what is this $5 million solar project? You could watch the meeting from Tuesday, or we would have Mark Reel come in and explain to you what that is, or have Rich come in, right? So like, I have to get a better understanding of what it is. Like, if you want to hear about pieces of equipment, then Rich will come back in and tell you about the different pieces, right? If you want to hear about why I want to fund the COA projects with free cash, and I want to move the building stabilization money into capital outlay, right? That's a different conversation. So like, just trying to.
So fair enough, Kim. So I think I would ask my committee what they want to do, and I think I will start out by saying I'm interested in the 5-year capital improvement plan and not the capital budget. I'm not, but other people may have other ideas about that. The capital budget being one where each item on it is over $25,000, i.e. the bus, the Kubota, the whatever, pieces of equipment. Where the 5-year plan is, what are we planning for going out in terms of the sewer or water, et cetera.
Go with the latter. Is that the right description? Yeah.
The capital improvement plan,
Yeah.
CIP.
I'm most interested in what's the financial impact on taxpayers of
You say that all the time, Ed. I gotta
capital
tell you.
improvement plan.
I'm gonna put you on a tape.
a
I'm just gonna
broken
go
record.
bing,
Right.
and it'll say exactly that.
That's what I'm most
Yeah,
important.
you are,
most in-
always.
So Kim, let me put it back to you. You said you wanted to do it now, and I'm sitting there and saying it's 8:45. I know you don't feel great. Let's have you come back,
Well-
because that's a very
well,
meaty,
I'm
there's
just-
some very meaty things on there to look at.
I just, again, though, I feel that we just, like, what is the impact of the capital improvement plan? It's $30 for a month for the fire station, right? What other pieces are we talking about, is my question.
There was a 6% increase in the tax for that average $850,000 assessed home. It's a 6% increase in the taxes.
Right.
That's,
So that
One
leads me
item.
to my, right, but there's really no other items on there in that one, right? The solar voltaic pays for itself in the years.
I'd like to
Right.
look at a
So my-
longer term, like the CIP at least, what the 5 years look like.
Okay, so then the question becomes, what you want is sort of the presentation from Tuesday with the people who have projects that are on that CIP to answer questions about the projects that are on that CIP.
And-
The placement of those things on, which is from Tuesday, but the placement of the things on the CIP is me and them, right? So like, I'm just trying to like, some of this is more urgent than others is my point, which is like the budget stuff that's like, are we good on these cars, right? We have till May to talk about the CIP, right? A conceptual plan about the future. So it's that. I just want to make sure that we're hitting our pieces in time, right? So
So I was gonna say.
just trying to get a sense.
Well, don't we also have $60+ million of approved projects with debt that have not yet been initiated? Including the sewer.
Probably,
Including the sewer
But I mean, so-
and,
right, but the things that are in the CIP, if they're not in there now, right? So the question will become, there isn't a list there, except for the one that Scott gets, so that your conversation is about having Scott come in and say when he thinks he's going to borrow for the pieces that have already been approved. That's not in the CIP.
No, I
right?
understood,
That-
but
right.
it'd be good
Right.
to understand that, because from a capital point of view, so those are incremental financial implications on the taxpayer. So I'd like to get a complete view, both stuff that we've approved but not yet begun construction or borrowing for, what we have
Okay.
anticipated for the coming fiscal year, and take a look out 5 years and see, hey, here's what we have for capital plans, and this is what the financial implications are for you, the taxpayer.
Okay.
So Kim, I don't know how many of us, the three of us were there on Tuesday and listened to the whole capital presentation.
Me too.
And there were three of us, four.
Tony was there.
Tony came in too. And I know Cheryl has listened to it. David, did you?
I haven't seen it yet.
Haven't listened to it. That was so complete. I feel if anybody wants to get the blow-by-blow on that, they should go back and listen to what you've already done and not repeat. You know, not have you go through that whole song and dance.
I'm fine with that.
Well, that's just what I wanted. I'm trying to, I'm always trying to drill down to what the question is, right? And so, and some of it is time sensitive because we have a budget due, right? And some of it is more conceptual conversations about the future, right? About a plan. And so I want to make sure we're addressing the stuff that we have to check off first. It seems like everyone's good with that, with the equipment and those pieces, right? And then we can sort of move on to sort of longer thoughts about long-term capital, right? But those are, that's different. So we can certainly invite Scott to come to another meeting. I just don't know what his schedule is like.
Elaine, was Kim saying that she wants to hit the high points on the budget tonight, so that you feel some things you want?
Did you want to hit the high points, David's question, Kim, hit the high points on the budget tonight?
Do you have some things you want to really address right now?
Whereas my attitude is you did such a great job both of those 2 Tuesdays.
That's what I'm asking. That's why
that's-
I'm asking. I wasn't sure that's what she wanted, so.
I want to be able to answer as much low-hanging fruit as we can so that everyone, if you have any questions that you know of right now, I can answer them so that we can cross them off the list and keep going, right? I don't want to lose any opportunity with all of us together to sort of move information forward. So we have done presentations, but like your email today, David, like there's some stuff that I can just answer, right? Like that you might be wondering about.
All right,
And
so-
so then you can cross it.
Okay, one question I have about the capital improvement plan here is why more of the, I would think that more of the buildings and facilities get like wrapped into an article. I think you started to talk about that, so that the amount of buildings and facilities maintenance that goes to the Council on Aging or the Water Department are each their own like buckets, because those are some very significant amounts in there. And I was also surprised looking out through fiscal 31, having listened to Sue Brown say that the Water Department building is 25 years old. I would think that that is going to be requiring A, more maintenance, and B, probably time to think about when does a new building like that, or will maintenance keep it going for another 50 years, the way we see some of the, buildings around the Boston area? Or should we be thinking about something like that there? So as I look at those are things that I, think about there. And just because of the way the town has operated over the past number of years, where Ron is the emperor of being able to Band-Aid every building here, that we have enough money that we can maintain adequately buildings, so we don't keep rolling over with these buildings that are too derelict to continue on with.
Okay, there's a lot of questions in this one, but it's a good one because it is a new change to the budget, and I'll do it quick. So you're right about all of that. I think one of the pieces that we've talked about over the last couple of years is that there isn't any money anywhere about general maintenance that's above sort of basic day-to-day in-house departmental tasks that they can handle on their own, or plan for big capital projects that Ron is slotting in within that fund. In the budget this year, so I met with Rich after the meeting on Tuesday, and we've been talking about facilities has been sort of a big focus of the last 2 weeks, right? Trying to get a true accounting. I have taken, there's the top part of the CIP where it says building and facilities now, and you can see that the top part says There's a section at the top, and then there's a project list that's on the bottom part. Right? I don't have it directly in front of me, but you can just see I put every single building.
Yeah,
So what I did, that's just a
54.
list of my general estimate. I was trying to stay around. So let me just go, this is crazy again. You passed a building and stabilization fund somewhere in the early 2000s. The point of building and stabilization fund is supposed to be that you contribute money towards it so that you can basically partial pay towards future projects that you need, and the money stays in that account when it rolls over year to year, building towards the amount that you need to eventually pay for it. You didn't actually do that. It didn't actually work in that way. There's no money in that account, right?
Ron Collins.
So, and you also, that means you don't have money anywhere else either to pay for general maintenance of the buildings. So what I'm proposing to do this year, and then with talking with Rich, is I've taken all that money. So you had about a $400,000 budget. It's like 470. I did an estimate of what we went through, what I thought was a good amount for each building that the town owns or a park or whatever. We put together a dollar amount. It's about $350,000. We took that 350 and we put it in capital outlay in the DPW. So if you go back, this was in the email I sent, if you go back and you look in their operating budget at the bottom, you can see I've added $350,000 down there. What that means is it's shifting from being the override money that was passed for building and stabilization to being in an operating budget for the future.
Good, yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's in there. Now, I'll tell you, it's not enough. It's
Yes,
not even near
yeah.
enough, right?
Right.
But it's a start. So for the remainder of the projects that Ron has put forward for this year, and this is where the use of free cash or stabilization comes into effect, because they're supposed to be paying for one-time things, right? So think about that you were going to potentially pay for a roof for the CAOA out of this $400,000 building fund that leaves almost nothing for the rest of the entirety of the town's buildings for a year. It makes no sense. So for the rest of the projects for this year, I've grouped all of the COA projects together. It's like 285, 375. There's a group of them. And I'm recommending that we put those all together as an article and use free cash for those, right? Because they're one-time expenses related to one building that are all very specific. That's what free cash is for, right? Then there were some additional projects that he had in there that are about $100,000, and I left that the beginning of the budget as the money for the building and stabilization fund. In the future, if we continue to use the building and stabilization fund, what we should be doing is making payments towards future projects. But because you're not doing it that way, you're basically passing them as articles at town meeting and using it like it's not serving its purpose in its way, and it's actually detrimental because it's not a true representation of the need that you have for these buildings. So that happened since Tuesday. So that's a good one. That's an update from this week. The reason that I'm not asking for more is because, quite frankly, I don't think we have it this year. I mean, I don't think we can afford to put $600,000 in there, right? I do think we should talk about a larger conversation about potentially using the money that's in stabilization, that excess beyond 12%, towards some sort of building maintenance capital fund. But I need more time to get to that, right? We have till May. But that is one of the changes that was made from the other day. The other one was about the $500,000 for the housing initiatives. I'm just going to say it again because this one is like a hot button, just like last year. Every year we get one. Last year was pre-K. So, there's a history here related to passing funding as an override for housing, right? You guys have been right here at the table, so you understand why I moved the money for the housing initiatives into an operating budget, because we know that it's related to these tax pieces that are annual, right? That's why we moved it in. It's an annual expense. But because it disappeared from the list of articles, it sent out a flare that we were cutting the housing money from the budget, and it was passed for housing. How can we be sure it's spent on housing? So I moved it back out so people can see that it still exists. But I'll make the same point that I made with the pre-K last year, which is it's an annual operating expense now. It belongs in a budget. doesn't matter to me where it goes. It's not a true representation of your overall town cost if you have $2 million that are also raise and appropriate outside your operating budget, right? You're just avoiding a fact. I didn't mind putting it right in the town manager's budget, even though it's spiked at 70%, because the reality is it needs to go somewhere, right? So that's the story with that one. Do you have anything else? What are the other weird oddities that you're curious about? Just, yeah.
Yeah, one thing that maybe we could touch on is the whole issue of how we fund the general stabilization fund and whether we're going to stick with 14%.
Well, so the good news, well, we don't have to stick with 14%, but you're at 14% right now. What's not on here, stabilization, and again, this is a conversation for May, right? Because really, it's what we would consider using the stabilization difference for, if the select board was in favor, is some of these larger projects, like a Governor Prince, right? Or like big capital needs. So you've got about $1.7 million over 12% in that count. Right now, there's nothing happening with it at all. It's just there, and we don't have to decide on that right now. I will tell you that we have committed to projects that I absolutely want to have money in reserve for that will stay there no matter how long a project takes, like a Governor Prince, and I want to make sure that we have the funding ready when we need it, right? But I do think there is some room there. I've talked a little bit about creating a capital equipment reserve, right? You could put anything over 12% in a capital reserve, and then when you're paying for your Sanders or you're paying for your whatever, it's basically just just transfer out. That's where it would capital equipment, like, so you're not like, that's how you fund these, right? It doesn't all have to be through taxation. It can be through any given year. It could be any combination of funding you have available towards any number of locations, any number of needs. So I think we will have a conversation about that when we only have about $600,000 right in free cash. And I think I was like, we funded everything, that's why we spaced some of it out to the fall, right? That's my recommendation, is that some of it gets funded in May and some of it gets funded in the fall. But it is pushing about $1.6 million worth of funding to the fall for equipment, right? So these are the ways we have to think about that. But the fall is usually the time, because that's when free cash is certified.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All set? No more budget questions?
Not right now.
Here you go, Kim.
Can I
Thank you
just,
very
Well,
much.
that's what I'm saying. I would rather address, any weird, and don't be afraid to ask me other questions too. I mean, it's fine. It is school vacation week next week, so I'm going to be in, out, and around. So you'll have to track me down via email or phone call if you need an answer on something. But I would much rather get the correct information out than have, things grow, right, in time.
Yes.
If you don't have a dentist yet, there's free dental services screening for children at Four Cs from Tuesday through Friday.
Oh, yeah?
Yep.
Oh,
You don't
good to
probably
know.
have a dentist right now, but the children.
No, listen.
It's just the children.
We still,
I know.
no, we drive to Connecticut still.
Oh, good Lord, no. So from Tuesday to Friday, everybody, Four Cs Dental Hygiene Program gives free oral screenings by their dental hygiene program, Tuesday
Nice.
through Friday,
could I
during
just,
school vacation week.
I just wanted to say thank you very much, because
thank you very much,
this
Kim.
was such a positive and informative and open-minded, resourceful, creative discussion that it's just fresh air and honest, whether it was good or bad.
Like the questions, Chris?
Appreciate it. Thank you.
It was a group
fun.
effort.
It was
a-
really
Yeah, it was.
like-
It was a
It
group
was a
effort.
group effort to pull it together.
Yeah.
A different way of looking
I'll
at the
tell you, I
budget.
opened that list. I said, not one of these questions is about the budget.
I knew that's what you said you were open. But it all, I mean, it's, the budget is not just the minutia of the figures there, I think is where we're coming from.
No, I know.
We
Listen,
trust
you
you
have
and
a
your
million
staff.
Right, you want to talk about all different types of financial things, and I'm here for
That's
it,
right,
right?
that's
That's not a
right.
problem. I'm happy to
That's
talk
right.
about it, but I was like, these are not budget questions. So, but like, it's good. I'd rather have you get them on a list, right? Like this, I know what people, you guys are out in the community, you're hearing things, more than
That's
I'm
right.
hearing them. I want to hear it too. So I'm fine to answer it.
Yeah, these are questions that are more of the kind that we get that have to do with financial issues rather than the specifics on the budget, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Kim.
You're totally welcome.
And stay
Happy
well.
to do it. Yeah.
So,
You can't catch the flu twice, right?
that's right, that's all, I hope not.
Amen.
It might be in the house, but I can't catch it again.
So I'm going to postpone review and discuss future goals of the Finance Committee until our next meeting. I am going to make one announcement. I do want to share with you what Jamie Balliott sent about the library, so you hear exactly what their plans are. At last night's trustees meeting, a decision was made to put the new library project on a one-year pause and not seek design funding at fall town meeting this year. The concern was that after the proposed new fire station estimated at $55 million and the Phase 3 sewer estimated at $4 million, it would not be the best environment to ask for another large project right away in the fall. The trustees are also firm they want to ask for a design and build funding at the same time. We're going to keep our Building Our Future program up on the website, and we'll continue to publicly discuss the project to educate the community. We plan to release a new educational video about why a new library is needed, and we're going to draft a statement on this pause in the next week or so, just to keep you up to speed on that.
I have a question for you. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been receiving an email from the Massachusetts Conflict of Interest law something. Is it?
You need to
is it
retake it.
spam, or is it
No,
legit?
No,
that
you
is
gotta take
legitimate.
it.
You need to take that.
Yeah.
This is,
People
just
whose
did it,
two-year
yeah.
cycle
okay.
has
So this is
expired,
This is legit?
it is legitimate.
All right.
It's a real easy,
Oh, yeah, but how many times
I
you
thought
get,
those were junk.
how many times you get spam?
No, that's-
Or you get, go.
That's a different story.
The fact that it's not junk mail, it doesn't mean that it's not a junk request.
So any other
write
liaison reports? Anybody else want to say anything? Meph, any liaison reports?
No, the select board meeting was mostly, I think, housekeeping stuff, other than the budget. There was no big item on there.
Okay, then our next meeting schedule, our next meeting is February 27th at 5:30.
5:30.
Yes, 5:30. And you heard me say, we did hear that Jeff would be likely not be able to make it at 5:30. So I thought a good idea to invite someone like Judy Wilson or DeCervo to come and talk to us about their departments, and then have Jeff come.
Elaine, you've got a hand up.
Oh, Jen. Hi, Jen.
Just a friendly, kind reminder, hello, to kind of approve the veterans transfer, so that I can get that processed.
Okay, so I bring that to you tomorrow?
Thought we did that first.
Yeah, or you can give it to Molly and she can bring it to me, either way, whatever's easy for you.
Okay, but bring it back to town hall tomorrow.
Well, you can, I think in the past, we've been able to email you a signed.
That's perfectly fine.
Okay, fine. So
Thank you.
February 27th, Jeff Deering, Judy Wilson, and then March 13th and March 27th are also 5:30. And then we'll discuss who else
So-
we want to come.
I'm just going to add, Judy Wilson's department head is community services, and so Mark Reel needs to be in attendance if you're having recreation or the library or the COA, so he will be invited as well.
Right, I
So,
did that. I sent Mark an email to talk to Judy.
Elaine,
Gail,
And he can talk about the solar project if you want, when he's there.
sure.
Thank you for recognizing me at the end of the meeting. I just wanted to add to the information that Kim gave you in terms of the affordable housing, that between 107 Cape Cod 5 and Governor Prince, and this comes from Elizabeth, there are 24 three-bedrooms, but there are also 68 two-bedrooms and 62 one-bedrooms. So 62 one-bedrooms, 68 two-bedrooms, and 24 three-bedrooms. I just thought I would share that with you. Thank you.
Gail. Thanks, Gail. Any other comments?
I hope that a couple moves into a one-bedroom and then stays and decides and then has babies, and that's going to increase our school population.
Here you go.
That's my hope.
So, can I have a motion?
Move we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.